Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Sharlee Dixon. Joining us today is Patrick Faga. Patrick is the founder and CEO of FirstWork, a digital application that simplifies discrete trial training to help young children with special learning needs. With a background in behavioral neuroscience and behavioral and decision sciences, Patrick has developed FirstWork to enhance learning through a structured, customizable digital experience for parents, professionals, and children alike. We're excited to have Patrick with us today to discuss his journey in creating FirstWork, the app's role in simplifying discrete trial training for children with special learning needs, and how its customizable reward-based approach helps both parents and professionals enhance children's learning experiences. Welcome to the show, Patrick. We're excited to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and really appreciative for the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing and about our perspective on technology and the way that that can link into improving the ability to deliver awesome lessons for children with special learning needs. So really special opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm also interested because we hear a lot of things, especially in the media, about how technology is just ruining the children of today. So I'm really interested to hear your take on how we can use technology for our good.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting conversation. It's definitely a
Absolutely.
dynamic situation.
Yes. So I always want to start with a bit of background with our guests. So starting with your journey, what inspired you to develop FirstWork and how did your previous experiences shape the app's creation?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of background. I am a passionate behaviorist, so I really love behavior science. When I was an undergraduate, I studied behavioral neuroscience, and I was just really passionate about everything behavior, which is what led me into a role in applied behavior analysis, which is a very common approach to help children with autism build skills. It's not just for kids with autism, but it's a very common approach for kids in that population. And so was working, in the field as a technician, so working one-on-one with a lot of children with autism. And I realized that there were really wonderful processes that were implemented every day in sessions, things that you could teach me as a technician or anybody else to make these really wonderful programs and interventions. But there was a lack of really effective systems that could make it possible for things to be a little bit easier for you to learn and easier for people like parents to pick up without as much of that expertise, because of course, professionals just know so much, and it's often really difficult for parents to implement some of the things that professionals do. So my background in ABA really kind of made me aware that there are these just really amazing processes available, but that the systems weren't quite there. And so given that I was also really interested in technology, it was just a bit of a worm in my brain that I couldn't get out. And eventually it led to me working on this idea for FirstWork. And it's been some time since then, and the application's out and being used by thousands of PCBAs. So it's been quite the journey, but it really started with just working in the field of ABA and kind of seeing all of those day-to-day processes and where there were areas where it could be possible to build systems to make things a little bit easier for everyone.
Nice. Because you're right. Being able to be a professional and then translate that to parents, being able to use those techniques at home can definitely sometimes be difficult, especially when we know children spend the majority of their time at home and can unlearn certain techniques easily.
Exactly. I mean, it's, parents have the biggest impact on children's development. Professionals
Mhm.
are there and can make a really big impact, but ultimately, that's only a small part of the day, even if it's a very involved therapy process like ABA, which is often tens of hours every week. Still, if you do the math, that's the vast majority of the time is being spent with your parents. So it's super important to be able to empower parents to do what they want to do and help their kids build skills. But yeah, as you said, it's often there's a lot that has to, be learned in that process. And of course, there's no shame in that, but it just takes time and is something that is another thing that parents need to do. And so I think any opportunity there is to sort of simplify some of those burdens and make the barriers to entry a little bit lower while being able to do exciting things is always really cool.
Absolutely. And so as I look through your website, it discussed a technique called discrete trial training. So for those of us who are not familiar with DDT or DTT, sorry, can you explain what it is and why it's such a valuable teaching technique in applied behavior analysis?
Sure. So DTT is a teaching pedagogy that I wasn't aware of until I got exposed to ABA myself. And it's a really subtle and nuanced teaching method that makes so much sense when you really think about it. So The way that it works essentially is it's all about breaking skills down into small, manageable steps and then teaching kids through one-on-one sessions in these trials, essentially, where we're going to practice a little component of this skill. And then we're able to provide shaping so that you know if it's correct or incorrect and are really able to work on, kind of very micro parts of skills instead of a really big skill, which has a lot of different components all at once. So one good way I think to think about what DTT is to think a little bit of what it isn't actually. So if you think about the standard educational experience, it's often pretty common for a bunch of kids to be in a classroom, and then a teacher might assign a worksheet, and that worksheet might have 20 questions on it. And so in that standard educational process, you in your sort of independent learning context will try a bunch for those 20 questions, and some of them will be right, some of them will be wrong. And you get that feedback at the very end where they say you got 18 out of 20 right. And that's an effective way to practice in a certain sense. But the problem with it from the learner's perspective is they don't really have that opportunity to fix the errors that they're making right as they're happening. So often those errors can kind of go unnoticed. And it's not as clear where exactly the problem is. So, often there's one little thing that's kind of causing those sorts of errors. And if you can address that right when it happens, instead of giving more opportunities to continue making those mistakes, it's just a lot easier to direct people towards the correct answers and the correct ways of doing things, as opposed to spending a lot more time than is necessary working on these really big goals and kind of big learning processes and then getting kind of meta feedback at the end. So it's essentially a process that breaks these bigger learning goals down into small little parts. And then there's a very clear instruction about what you're supposed to do. The learner gives a response. And then right after that happens, the instructor is able to basically provide feedback on whether or not that was correct or incorrect. So if you're getting the correct answer, you can kind of build that momentum that, we're making progress and we're moving in the right direction. So the learner has that certainty and that kind of reward that they're on the right track. And then if you start to get off track, instead of letting you go, 2 streets down and be all the way in the wrong neighborhood, you kind of just stop right there and say, actually, let's take a look at this and let's try to do it this way instead. So the learners are able to find that right answer and not spend as much time in that sort of struggle and not knowing, because frankly, they don't learn very much in that process. If you're making mistakes, really the way that you learn about that mistake is somebody can correct that and then tell you it's something else that you could do that would have a better result. So it's really focused on breaking things down so that you can look at smaller behaviors, not get as overwhelmed, and then start to address things right at the moment they're happening, as opposed to over this bigger time scale. So lots of words there, but it's essentially a tutoring-based strategy that breaks things down and allows you to work on smaller goals instead of bigger goals for really just about any task.
Okay. And honestly, that sounds like it could be a bit challenging, maybe especially for parents and even clinicians to learn and how they would implement that with children who already have a certain level of difficulty with learning. How does FirstWork simplify and even digitize that process to make it more accessible to both groups?
Yeah, absolutely. So on top of it being a process that has steps and you need to learn and understand, there's also sort of a logistical component to this, which is depending on the types of lessons that you're going to do, you need to have these very specific materials. So very common DTT goals are things like matching, receptive identification, which can you show me which one is a book? And then you select the book out of a list. Expressive language, which is when you ask a question and then somebody gives a vocal response. But really a lot of it is focused on understanding the identities of and the names of really common things in our environment. So essentially kind of building up those categories of what things are and how they relate to everything else. So very early language development skills a lot of the time are focused on a DTT. And something that is needed for that is pictures of all of these things. And that's really where digitization can make a really big impact. So currently a lot of professionals will go and print and laminate their own materials. So they spend a lot of time and go find these materials, create them bespoke for lessons, which takes, of course, a lot of their valuable time. You could also purchase big sets of images, in basically cardboard cards and use those for your teaching images. But in every process, there's just a lot of steps involved, and it's really hard to access a huge range of images, because even if you're printing them off or buying a set, you're not going to have 10,000 images. You're going to have, a few hundred. So one of the really cool things with having an application is you can take a lot of those materials that are needed for lessons and then put them into an easy to access repository so that you can customize these lessons on the fly and not have to work as much with these physical materials, which just kind of add an extra step to that process. So one of the beauties of having it in an app format is that you don't need to have those cards. So parents don't need to have the cards. They don't need to know exactly how to set them up. Just kind of, they can work with professionals who can help them figure out what goals are relevant and how to kind of customize everything. So there's a lot of opportunities to just do it a little bit quicker, not have to do as much setup beforehand. And then in sessions, you have a lot more customizability just because there's a really big range of targets you can select from in the application. And sometimes things are lost or damaged and you might have issues with physical cards. So there's a lot of benefits from the logistical perspective, especially of just having it all in one place on your phone or your tablet instead of sort of having to manage this big set of physical materials that are very specific.
Absolutely. And speaking of it being highly customizable, how do parents or professionals really personalize the program to meet the specific needs of each child? How does that
Yes,
part work?
it's a great question. So one of the things that's really special about Discrete Trial Training DTT is that it's such a flexible framework. It's something that can be realized in so many different ways. You could have a lot of different numbers of answer options. You can provide different levels of prompting and error correction and rewards. And so there are a lot of different ways you can structure lessons and they have different impacts on the learning process. So to make things easier, to provide more guidance, to make things a little more difficult when you're kind of moving on towards really having a good grasp on the target. So essentially what we've done with FirstWork is we've created systems that allow you to do a lot of this customization inside of the application. So you can basically set up the lessons based on the needs of a specific learner. So if there's a learner who needs a little bit more assistance and maybe they're really new to a target, you could set it so that it's easy and gives a lot of prompts and gives a lot of error correction so that essentially it's as, sort of easy to make those initial correct attempts as possible and phase it up over time. And so it's possible to really closely tailor everything to the needs of that learner, especially if you're a professional and you have that extra knowledge and context and background from your professional training. So for professionals and for parents, though, there's just a lot of customization options that you can use. And it's also built to be a collaborative tool. So professionals who have families who are clients can essentially communicate the goals and programs with them really easily. So a lot of the time for parents, it's not an entirely independent process. It's something that is done in conjunction with professionals, which can make it even easier to customize things at a really, really kind of granular level.
Very cool. Very cool. It really seems like it might even start with some lower level things like matching and identification. Is there a way that the app can adapt as a child grows, learns, progresses? And is it really set for, early childhood, or is there a set age group for it?
So set age group is a little hard to determine because with neurodivergent learners, the functional skill level and the age level don't necessarily correlate super directly. So often age ranges can be a little bit broader than they would be in a neurotypical learning environment. But when we just think about the goals, the simpler goals that we have are things like matching the sound that letters make to that letter and matching. So these are kind of very simple goals that are often pre-academic. And then we have other goals that fall pretty nicely into the typical academic segments of things like arithmetic and reading, for instance. So we don't have anything more advanced than that at this stage. I would say multiplication and division are two of the more advanced skills that we have inside of the app. But there is a pretty large amount of things you can work on, especially if you're starting off with some of those earlier goals. So if you're starting with matching, for instance, there's quite a lot of learning that you could do inside of the platform before you run out of goals. So we typically think of it as pre-academic to early academic. So when you think of your first couple of years in elementary school, often are working on things like arithmetic and reading. And in the future, we do hope to increase the curriculum so that there's more that you can work on there. But we do definitely like the idea that for learners who fit well with the platform and it's a really effective tool for them, it's nice to be able to just move on to different goals and be able to use that platform for a longer period of time if it's something that works well for you. So definitely one of our goals is to just have more that you can work on inside of the application and expand the period of time that learners could reasonably be using it to work on a lot of those harder skills, things like math skills.
Nice, nice, nice. So earlier you mentioned that FirstWork is available and can be used by both professionals and parents. How does it differ in functionality for each group? Of course, professionals have more experience and education on using these specific skills, and then parents like me are just the clinician said we should use this. We're going to try it out and see how it works. So, how do parents really benefit from using this at home?
So the thing that's really unique about FirstWork is that one of the realizations behind the application was that digitizing isn't always enough. Educational technology has been around for 20 years, and for the most part, not that much has actually changed about the way that learning happens. Obviously, there's lots of educational tools that are very helpful in the classroom, but for the most part, I think that the problem with educational technology is that kids are not often very motivated to engage in it, and so it's fundamentally very similar to the way that things have always been done, where parents are there really moderating the process and essentially playing that role in the at-home context using some materials that were provided by the school. And so when you think about your traditional digital technology that's educational focused, it has that same characteristic where it might be a little bit easier, it might be better in a lot of different ways, but without the parents being there to really make sure that that learning is happening and that learner is on track, they're not going to select that over YouTube, for instance, or something else on their device. And so that's part and parcel of the way that we build FirstWork, which is really thinking about the digital environment a little bit more holistically on top of just the way that we approach the teaching. So the way our application works is it has essentially a focus mode. So the way that works is it limits access to selected applications like YouTube or games during lessons. So while FirstWork is on, if you've selected those apps, there really aren't any open doors to go have more fun with right now. You can't just go tab over YouTube and do something that you'd prefer. That's currently not available. And then when you finish your lessons, you can earn time on those fun applications. So you're able to leverage those things that kids already know and love as rewards for the learning. And this creates a nice holistic experience where it's possible to have a little bit more of an independent learning context around FirstWork, where parents can have programs that they've worked either built themselves or built in conjunction with professionals. And then they can set that up during essentially traditional device time. So maybe there's an hour before dinner where you typically are making food and your learners are a little bit more independent and maybe they're on device time. You could set up FirstWork for that hour. So maybe every 10 minutes, a couple questions will come up that are relevant to some specific goals for that learner. They'll answer those questions and then they can get back into all the fun apps. So it creates a really nice structure that fits into the day and doesn't really require the same level of structure that a traditional digital educational experience does, which is pretty much just like any other homework experience where at the end of the day, you need to be there moderating the entire process, where with FirstWork, it's something that can kind of change an existing part of the day, that sort of screen time, free screen time period, and make it a bit more educational. And that's not to say that you can't use it in a more direct context as well. But one of the really unique things about the app is that it's kind of built to be motivating for learners and built in light of the reality that the tablet is a distracting place. And if you don't kind of put some constraints there, it's never going to be that kind of independent learning experience or that independent experience that almost all other applications on your device are, where if you think about YouTube, for instance, parents don't typically need to moderate that experience for their learners to engage with it. Learners are really happy to do that. So it can kind of be a little bit more like that, where it's a bit more self-directed than really any other educational application out there right now.
Very nice. I really like that you can kind of set it to, like you mentioned, it's not like you're having to sit with your child during something that should be independent time and watch over them to be able to make sure they stay focused on what they need to be working on. As a parent, let me tell you, that is probably one of the most difficult times during homework time or independent time when he's got like a study sheet or something like
Yeah.
that. I need to watch, because if it's online, he's
Oh,
going to
yeah.
be on YouTube, like you mentioned. Like there is no way for me to say, I mean, I could say it, but that's not
Yeah.
necessarily mean that that's what is actually going to happen. And so being able to have that built-in digital reward system, it seems like it would keep children engaged during the whole time and really motivated to do what they need to do before they can do what they want to.
It really is very exciting, because that's, especially when you think about the special education population, it's even more difficult a lot of the time to create those independent experiences. And one of the things that we've been really excited about is in the special education classroom setting, as well as in ABA, this has been a tool that creates the opportunity for a bit more independent learning, which is just really hard to replicate with other tools. So it's been a really exciting and kind of unique part about the tool, is on top of, the kind of the work we're doing with making DTT digital, also just creating a platform that's a little bit more self-directed than most things out there, because there's just a lot of extra opportunity for learning if it can be a bit more independent, because parents and teachers and everybody else are at max capacity already. It's hard to create more time when all the time is spoken for. So it's kind of a really exciting opportunity to be involved in a different period of the day than is traditionally conceptualized as where those interventions could happen.
Absolutely. And speaking of customization and these really cool features, one, again, I already like the reward system,
Okay.
but can you give us some more of the popular features and some really cool things that the app does?
Yeah, so I would say that the most popular features would be the definitely the reward system. I mean, people love the reward system. It's kind of a really unique thing. So that's probably right up there at the top of the list. And then when we think about some of the more focused features, some of the ones that people are most excited about, especially because this app is built so closely in conjunction with professionals, are a little bit, kind of professionally oriented. But my favorite one actually is, and I have a bit of a story about it, is this feature called distractor hiding. So we're doing a research study for FirstWork right now. And something that we learned during the research process was that there are some learners who figure out the system and are actually faster than we anticipated them to be. So they will see the correct answer and they're ahead of us by about a half a second. So they'll try to find the correct answer. But because the system wasn't ready for their response yet, they kind of are like, oh, well, I tried to give the correct answer and the system didn't recognize it. So I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm just going to, press other things. And so we got this piece of feedback that there are these learners who really do seem to be selecting the correct answer, but the system was just not quite fast enough for them. So what we did was we added this new distractor hiding feature. And so what that does is it plays the question. So it might be something like, which one is a dog? And typically all of the answer options are presented from the very beginning. So while you're here, where is, or which one is, the picture of the dog is present on the screen. So if you can kind of anticipate when you maybe hear the duh, that we're probably looking for dog, you might go select it a little bit before, the system is ready for your answer. So we added this new feature that makes it so that all the answer options are not present at all until the whole question had been answered. And for those learners with that profile where they were a little bit quicker than we were expecting, it was kind of the perfect fix for them where they were able to take that extra time to hear the whole question and not get a little bit ahead of the process. And it made a really big impact on their trajectory and just how they experienced the application because it was sort of synced up with their timing a little bit more closely. So we've done a lot of really kind of detailed feature work when it comes to customization that really allows you to match some of those unique situations. And sometimes the way that the solution comes out, like in that case, is sort of an interesting one where it might not necessarily be what you would have expected. So there is a whole myriad of features inside of the application that are like that, where there's a really specific reason why it's there, and there's sort of a type of profile of learner or a type of behavior in mind that it's responding to. And you're able to, kind of incorporate that and turn it on or off depending on your needs. So there's a whole lot of them and they're all a little bit detailed, but those are the types of features that really have me excited because I think it's, sort of speaks to what's exciting about DTT in my mind, which is that it can really be made to match the needs of a learner and, kind of respond to their specific circumstances as opposed to being kind of a big thing that we try to make sure that everybody can fit into. So being able to have those kind of really tight customization options that have maybe only an impact for, a small segment of learners, but a really important impact for those learners are the ones that I'm most excited about.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Most of us spend more time at work than anywhere else doing anything else. So why not spend that time in a job you love? Introducing Triad's Jobs Marketplace, the only job site dedicated specifically to behavioral and mental health professionals. Featuring more than 1,000 open jobs from dozens of behavioral and mental health employers, and searchable by location, professional field, employment type, specialization, and more. Jobs Marketplace helps you find your next career opportunity. Full-time, part-time, or gig time, make the most of your time. To access Jobs Marketplace, register for your free professional account at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT, and then click to Jobs Marketplace. If you're already a member of the Triad community, visit app.hellotriad.com/jobs. That's app.hellotriad.com/jobs. Visit us today and take your next career step tomorrow.
Very nice, very nice. And so you've mentioned actually a couple of times that FirstWork has really been able to help children learn faster compared to some traditional methods that are out there that, of course, work, but FirstWork is helping them to move a bit faster. And we love a good story. So can you share some success stories or examples of how the app has improved the learning experience?
Sure. So with the speed, one of the things that's really interesting is it's actually almost more of a physics thing than it is anything else. So if we kind of return to the example of how people traditionally do these lessons, they're using these physical cards. And something with physical cards you have to do is set up an array. So let's say the question is, which one is a dog? One of the images will be a dog, and then there will be a bunch of other images that are other animals, for instance, or other objects out there. And every trial that needs to be set up. So you need to have, say, 4 or 6 images. And so every time you do a trial, you need to go, make sure you have the correct image, make sure you have some incorrect images, set them up and orient them towards a learner, and then ask them the question. They give a response. You give them, a response as to whether or not that was correct. If they get it correct, you're presumably going to move on to the next one. And then you need to do that all again. And it doesn't, maybe when I say it out loud, it does sound like a little bit of a long process, but it's something that that takes a lot longer than I think people give credit for. Each time you have to do that, you have to go do quite a few manual steps. During that process, that learner has to sort of just wait. So it's not really something that's awesome for them. Usually they're, they're not that excited about sitting at the table and waiting for the next 15 seconds to move on. So the thing that's really exciting with the application is because all of that's done automatically, especially if you know the correct answer already. So for instance, there's mastered trials, which you might do. So we assume that because of previous performance, you would actually know the answer to this question, but just to make sure that nothing has changed and we don't need to continue practicing, we might go do 10 quick questions on that target. If you were using the physical cards, even though it's something that the learner already knows and might just fly through really quickly, each trial is going to take you those 15 seconds to go set up. And then you have to move on to the next one. Where with FirstWork, that can be, almost instantaneous. So we've heard some really exciting reports, especially when we're working on those master trials, which allows us to kind of control for whether or not the learner does know the correct answer. Often kids are able to complete upwards of 20 questions in a minute using the platform, where it would be really challenging to deliver more than about 5 using physical mechanisms. So really just a physics thing at the end of the day is that people just can't go grab those things and set them up much faster than that. So even if you practice, and some organizations really do practice, like doing it as fast as possible, there's just some significant limitations on how quickly you can do that. And so there's just kind of a myriad number of benefits to being able to do things a little more quickly with the same level of specificity. You just don't need to spend as much time, especially if we're thinking about something where it's practice like a master trial. You just demonstrating that that correct answer is really what we're looking for there. So just being able to do that and move on to the next thing a little bit more quickly can have a lot of benefits. So that's been the source of where we've seen a lot of those speed benefits. And it's been pretty consistent across all contexts, just because it's kind of a universal thing that people are not quite as quick as machines at dropping down physical cards. So that's been a big source of those differences between the platforms. And of course, there are a number of other things that we've noticed, but that's been one of the most consistent and sort of solid findings that we've seen about the app. Is it's just very difficult for people to set things up anywhere near as quickly.
Absolutely. Because like you mentioned before, you got to be able to make sure you have all the items and the cards and everything with you, and then trying to set them up, move them out of the way, and then also figure out how to keep the child from not being distracted.
Yep.
In that environment, I'm sure is quite difficult to manage.
Yeah. And of course you have to track the progress as well. So there's a tracking component. So yeah, there's just a lot going on in that situation, and it allows folks to sort of simplify things and sort of tagging onto that. And I think responding a little bit to what you said at the beginning about just how interesting the time it is with digital technology and how that can just have it's a different world now, basically. One thing which I heard that really excited me, and I've heard this a number of times, is people would get in touch and they'd be like, I had this really strange thing happen. I was doing these DTT trials with the application, and I noticed actually increased eye contact between me and the learner compared to a typical session. And the reason that a lot of clinicians think that this was happening is that because they're able to not worry about that setup and not worry about that next trial, their focus is a little bit less split. So the tablet sort of creates this interesting interface for that human interaction in that case, where it's kind of a counterintuitive thing that you're switching to a digital framework and now you're interacting a little bit more. But if that digital framework allows a person to focus a little bit more on another person and not be focused on manual tasks and tracking data and just doing all this other stuff, that your professional focus to be a little bit more focused on the interaction with the learner that you're working with, as opposed to this manual process. So that's been a really interesting thing with technology, and sort of just has had me thinking a lot about where technology has, a really positive impact versus where it has less positive impact. Because I think that there's definitely a mix. Clearly technology can have negative impacts, and there's, certain types of experiences and applications that are better than others. But it is, I think, really interesting just to think about in the digitization of processes. That's kind of an interesting characteristic. Like, does that process take a person away from the interaction with another person? Because if it does, there's actually a decent chance that there'd be a better surface area essentially for human connection than there was before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you just mentioned something I really hadn't thought about until you said it, but tracking progress and being able to report out that progress. How does that process work? with the app?
Yeah. So the application is essentially automatically tracking the progress that you're making. It's all saved locally and securely on your device and only your device. So you're the only person with access to that data. But essentially, as trials happen, we're recording the progress for you. So it's something that takes that essentially out of your need to focus on at the end of your lesson. You could just go into the view progress page and go take a look at how well you did. So instead of needing to sort of carry those numbers around in your head, I think they got 3 right and they got 2 wrong, you can just have the system record it. And another interesting thing with that as well is that, humans obviously make mistakes. We're human. It's what we do. And so, it's impossible for a technician to be 100% accurate at recording, the trials that they do over a long period of time. People are going to make mistakes. And that's not even to mention, unfortunate situations like people who are trying to misreport data and things like that. So one of the nice things about having that automatic data collection as well is that it sort of allows you to have a little bit higher fidelity collection. You know that, clinician A and clinician B, if they're both using the system, have the same exact criteria for when the system says that you got it right versus when the system got it wrong. So it allows for a little bit of that standardization, which just has a lot of benefits when you're doing a secondary analysis or trying to see if certain programs that are running are, better than others. You can control for some of those extra factors, like how does the clinician score it? Maybe there's like a subtle difference there, but a couple percent difference, is a big difference in the world of statistics. So it's a cool way to sort of simplify those concerns about fidelity and just have it all be the same across the board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what kind of feedback have you received from users so far? And how do you see FirstWork evolving as you continue to develop it?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So separating it into a few different buckets here. One of the big pieces of feedback we received from the ABA community is that the application saves a lot of time and money on material preparation. So on top of creating these exciting new options for folks, it's also a little bit simpler to just have everything in an application as opposed to spending professional time creating cards. Professional time, I think, is traditionally undervalued in the first place. But even if you take it at the sort of written value of an hour of BCVA's time, spending any amount of time on creating those cards, it is really quite expensive. Similarly, purchasing cards is really expensive. So one of the things that's been really great to see is that on top of creating new opportunities and new customization options, it's also just directly less expensive than managing a big fleet of physical cards. So that's been a really exciting piece of feedback from the professional community, is that saving a lot of time on an unpreferred task and ultimately is a less expensive process, which is usually the goal with digital. So it's been great to see that that's been coming true for us. And then on the parent side, something that we've been hearing a lot is that it's just really easy to introduce, which is really what we were most excited about and kind of most hopeful about for the application, was that it was something that parents could really pick up and be able to just start running with. And, parents understand the concept. Everybody knows about kids' relationship with technology. So a lot of the time there's that kind of fun, like, oh man, like they can earn YouTube time. That's going to be awesome. I'm sure they'll be happy with that. So parents are excited and really understand what we're trying to do and find that it's something that learners are much more willing to engage with than a traditional activity. And kind of going back to our previous discussion, it's something that can live in a little bit more of an independent context. Obviously, people should be providing all the oversight, making sure that everything is going well, but it's a little bit different than a standard educational experience where, like, if you're not there, we're now doing YouTube. So, it's
Right.
Allows you to have a little bit more certainty and a little more flexibility in how you set that up. So for professionals, it's been really streamlining things and making the professional life and the material preparation process a little bit easier and less expensive. And then for parents, it's been a lot more about the actionability and the, and having something that they really can just introduce without, a ton of training or a ton of schedule changes. So it's nice to hear that it's something that really does fit into that period of the day that we were hoping it would, because that's where there's a big opportunity, because not much else can sort of fit in there.
Very nice. Nice. Okay. So the app is available on both Android and iOS, correct?
That's correct. Android and iOS.
Okay. And so what is the process for parents and professionals to start using it? Is it like a subscription type of situation? Tell me about it.
Yeah, so we have basically a free to subscription setup. So when you download the application, no information will be requested. You will just get full access to the application for 10 whole days, all the content, all the customization options. So our hope is that you can go check it out and try it without any limitations. If you love it and it's a great fit for you, then you'll have a good amount of time to make sure that you understand it and, it's something that you do want to do. And if it is something that you like, Then after that 10-day period of time, if you want to activate a subscription, you can activate a subscription directly on the App Store or the Play Store to maintain the full access to the library over an extended period of time. If you don't do the subscription, there is a limited amount of content that will still be available to you. So you can always play around with it and take another look at it. And maybe it's not the time today, but you want to go check it out in a month after a big update that you heard about or something like that. Always an option. But essentially, our model is that we want to make the application really widely available so that folks can just see if it's something that's a good fit for them without having to make any commitments. We don't like the idea of kind of trapping people into that. So you can just check it out. If you like it, you can subscribe. But yeah, it should be really simple to do. It takes about 2 minutes to get set up from start to finish. So you can just search FirstWork on the App Store or the Google Play Store. It'll be the first thing that comes up. And it's got the blue seahorse logo, and you can download it. And there's a tutorial. So we'll walk you through how you can use it and understand how the lessons work from there.
Nice. Okay. And so looking ahead, how do you envision FirstWork growing in terms of features and then its potential impact on ABA and early childhood education? And then also you mentioned that you've got a future research initiative that they're working on right now. Can you share more details about that as well?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll start at the end there with the research. So the thing that our research study is focused on is on measuring the impact of FirstWork as an independent learning tool. So we've been working with thousands of professionals for quite a while now and really understand what the tool can do in the hands of professionals. But professionals, of course, provide a lot of additional support and structure and guidance to the experience. So a professional with the tool is not quite the same as a tool in a much more independent context. So what this study is really focused on is using FirstWork in a controlled but independent learning setting where learners are essentially self-directedly working through programs, and earning time on their favorite apps as a reward. So essentially looking at it in an analog of that at-home context so we can start to better understand, what parents can expect from the application as a learning tool for their learners if they're using it in that at-home context, working on new skills. So essentially, we're looking at undeveloped skills, so goals that learners have not made much progress on. And then we introduce that skill on the application and are measuring the progress that learners are making towards mastering those skills. The study is not quite yet ready to be published, but we've seen some really exciting results. So we're very excited for that coming up. And that will be a big thing we'll be sharing about. And then returning to kind of the whole vision for FirstWork and where we'd like to go from here, which does link up with our research study a bit, is there's a big access to care issue in really all of mental health care, but especially with autism, there's a real need for early intervention. Kids who are able to get into services more quickly and start working on building skills typically are able to make a lot of progress. So it's a unique opportunity early in life to just start practicing these important skills after a diagnosis happens. And unfortunately, there are often 6 to 12 month wait lists, sometimes even longer in major cities. And if you're in rural areas, it might not even be possible to get services. So there's just big gaps for a lot of people in a lot of different places that make it so that parents are sort of stuck for often a very long period of time. And there isn't really that much that they can do aside from wait, which is just a real shame. And everybody in ABA, I think, is really passionate about finding solutions to this. And it's something I think so many people can get behind. So what we want is for FirstWork to be something that can maybe have a little bit of a role in filling some of that gap. A lot of the goals that you can work on in FirstWork are goals that are really common early goals when you get started. And we're using the same process that you'll traditionally use inside of sessions. So our hope is that the application can serve as a little bit of a bridge and something that parents can introduce independently, whether that be, sort of as like a homework tool if they're in services to just continue the opportunities, or even potentially before services even begin, being able to start building some critical skills that they know are important for their learner in a way that's a good fit for them. So ultimately, we would like to, have the application be something that is not just a professional tool, but is also something that is used by, in the professional context as an avenue for parents to get started when they might not have as many options on wait lists and things like that.
Absolutely. And really, Patrick, that's really what I was thinking of when I started doing research on FirstWork. I used to be a school social worker and I worked with children who were needing to be evaluated for special needs education inside of the school system. And our wait list, and it wasn't a large city that I worked in, but our waiting list was at least 9 to 12 months. And I would feel so bad as the social worker telling a family, like, I'm
Yeah.
really sorry, you just have to wait. And
Yeah.
being able to give them a tool that they can use at home for their child so they're not just sitting and waiting, for the school system to be able to help them is incredible.
Well, thank you. And I know that it's not just you who feels that way. I think like so many professionals who are in that position of, I mean, it's the least, I think it's professionals' least favorite thing to tell families is like, hey, I don't have the ability to help you. So definitely something we're really passionate about, and hopefully being able to make an impact on over time and just create more tools. And obviously one tool is not going to be the total solution for anybody, but I think that given that there's nothing else right now, it's important to build tools, and hopefully there'll be much more comprehensive solutions that can kind of speak to all the different needs of learners that can develop and be a little bit more available to parents over time. So definitely hopeful to be a part of that.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to watching FirstWork grow. I want to actually share it with a lot of my former school district colleagues, because I do really believe that it could help our children.
Oh, well, thank
For
you so
sure.
much.
Yeah. Where can listeners learn more about FirstWork, and where can they download this on their device?
Yeah. So if you want to get a little bit of an overview and some visuals about how the app works, we have a lot of that on our website, which is www.firstworkapp.com. So firstworkapp.com. And then if you search FirstWork, one word on the App Store on Apple or on Google, it should be the first thing that'll come up. There's a little seahorse logo there, and it's a blue background. So you should see that pop up, and it's free to download. So if you can find it there, you can just press install, and then you'll be good to go to check it out yourself. So if you want to just kind of jump right into it, I recommend downloading the app. There's tutorials, so you'll be able to kind of get a guided experience and see how everything works. And if you'd like a little bit more information, the website is a great place to go, which is www.firstworkapp.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Patrick, I have really appreciated speaking with you today.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been absolutely wonderful to speak with you as well. And thanks for sharing about your professional experiences too. It's really great to have that kind of shared insight in the conversation. So really appreciative of the opportunity and for you sharing your time with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you again. And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. The resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.